The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight when Damian Moretti walked into Nora Whitlock's life and turned everything she thought she understood about safety into a lie. Not gently, not with warning. He walked into the emergency room at 11:47 on a Tuesday night with four armed men at his back, past the triage desk, past the security guard who took one look and stepped aside without a word, straight to the curtain where Nora was trying to keep a 52-year-old construction worker alive after a ceiling collapse. She didn't look up. She had two fingers inside the man's chest cavity, managing a bleed, and she was not going to look up for anyone. "You're the nurse," the voice said, "the one who found my son." She looked up then. If you've ever wondered what you would do if the most dangerous man in the city showed up while your hands were covered in someone else's blood, if you think you'd stay calm, if you think you'd know the right thing to say, then this story is going to test every assumption you have. Before we go further, if you're watching this and you've ever done the right thing and had it cost you everything, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story travels. Subscribe if you haven't. Because what happens next to Nora Whitlock is the kind of thing that doesn't let you go. It started the night before, which already felt like a different lifetime. Nora Whitlock had been on her feet for 11 hours when she finally clocked out. Not 11 hours of clean, manageable work. 11 hours of a pediatric asthma attack that nearly went wrong. A construction worker with a rebar through his shoulder who screamed for 4 straight minutes before they got enough sedative into him. A teenage girl who'd taken pills and lied about how many until her body started telling the truth. And an elderly man who came in complaining of indigestion and was dead from a massive MI 40 minutes later, despite everything they did. That was a Tuesday. Tuesdays were supposed to be slower. She changed out of her scrubs in the locker room, standing at the sink for a moment with the water running cold over her wrists, the way she'd started doing after bad shifts. Not for any dramatic reason, just because the cold helped her feel like herself again, instead of just a pair of hands attached to a set of reflexes. Her face in the mirror looked like someone who'd borrowed it from a woman 10 years older and hadn't quite given it back yet. She was 36. She'd been a nurse for 9 years. She lived alone in a 2-room apartment on Callum Street with a dying succulent on the windowsill and a tab of melatonin. She took every night at 10 because without it, her brain didn't know how to stop. She had friends, not many. The kind of friends you text on birthdays and meet for drinks 3 times a year, and genuinely like, but never quite find the time for. Her mother called on Sundays. She had a gym membership she used more than most people and less than she intended. She'd had a serious relationship that ended 2 years ago because Marcus couldn't handle her hours, and she didn't hold that against him anymore, though for a while she had. She was, in other words, a real person, not a hero, not a saint. Just someone who went to work and did a hard job well, and asked for very little in return except to be left alone at the end of it. The rain hit her the moment she stepped outside. Not a drizzle. A real, committed winter rain that went sideways in the wind and immediately soaked through her collar before she got her coat fully zipped. She swore under her breath, pulled her bag up over her shoulder, and started toward the parking structure 2 blocks down. She almost didn't see him. He was sitting at the bus stop on the corner of Meridian and 4th, which was the kind of bus stop that existed as a technicality rather than a convenience. The route that stopped there ran until 9 on weekdays, and it was now past midnight. The shelter had one intact panel of plexiglass and one that was missing, so the rain came straight through onto the bench. The boy sat in the middle of that bench with his hands folded in his lap. He was maybe 9, maybe 10. Dark hair plastered flat against his forehead. A coat that was too thin for the temperature. He was soaked through. And he was sitting perfectly still in a way that no child sits. Not crying, not hunched against the cold, not looking up and down the street for whoever was supposed to come get him. Just still. The way animals go still when they've learned that moving draws attention and attention is dangerous. Nora stopped. She told herself not to. She had told herself variations of this before. Not my problem. I've done my shift. I can't carry everyone. And she had even believed herself on several occasions. But the boy was sitting in the rain at midnight and nobody else was on the street, and the stillness of him was the specific kind of stillness she recognized from work. The kind that meant something had happened to him that was too large for him to process out loud. She walked over. "Hey," she said, crouching down to his level so she wasn't looming. She'd learned that with scared kids at the hospital. Never stand over them, never crowd. "Pretty rough night to be out here." He looked at her. His eyes were dark brown, clear, and completely unreadable. Not the glassy look of shock. Something more deliberate than that. "I'm waiting," he said. "For the bus?" A pause. "For someone." "Okay." She pulled her coat a little tighter against the wind. "How long have you been out here?" Another pause. Longer. I was deciding how much to tell her, and she could see him doing it, which meant whatever he decided would be a calculated choice and not an accident. That wasn't a 9-year-old's instinct. That was something taught. "A while," he said. She glanced at his wrists. Even in the bad light, she could see the marks. Not deep, not recent, but the kind of bruising that comes from rope or zip ties worn for too long. Her stomach did something quiet and specific. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "No." "Those marks on your wrists say something different." He looked down at his wrists, back up at her. "I'm fine." "I'm a nurse," she said. "I know what fine looks like, and I know what not fine looks like, and those are zip tie marks." He didn't answer, but something in his face shifted, almost imperceptibly, like a door opening a crack to check who's knocking and then not quite closing all the way again. "Is there someone I can call?" she said. "A parent? Anyone?" "I need to get home." "Okay, where's home?" He told her an address. She pulled out her phone and put it in. The map loaded. 20 minutes out of the city, past the reservoir, into the kind of private road territory that didn't show up clean on satellite. She looked at him. He looked back at her. "That's not a bus route," she said. "No." "Can we call the police? They could—" "No police." Flat. Immediate. No hesitation. "Please." The please came a half-second later, slightly softer, and she understood that it was genuine even though the rest of it was practiced. She stood up and looked down the street in both directions. Completely empty. The rain hadn't let up. She thought about what she was doing, which was the problem. When she thought about it, every rational part of her brain said, "Call someone. Call 911. Hand this off. You're exhausted, and this is not your job." But the kid was sitting in the rain with zip tie marks on his wrists, and the specific stillness of someone who had already decided he couldn't trust adults to make the right call. And she knew, not hoped, knew, that if she walked away or called the police against his will, whatever fragile cooperative thing was happening right now would collapse, and he'd disappear, and she would never know what happened to him. "My name is Nora," she said. "I'll drive you home. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to." He looked at her for a long moment, then he stood up. He was slight for his age. The coat hung off him, and he moved with the careful economy of someone whose body hurt somewhere. "Elias," he said. "Nice to meet you, Elias." They walked to her car without speaking. She turned the heat on full before she'd even started moving, and out of the corner of her eye she saw him hold his hands up to the vent and close his eyes for just a second. The first unguarded thing he'd done. She didn't push him. She drove, and the rain came down, and she put on the radio low enough that it was background rather than noise, and she let the silence be what he needed it to be. About 10 minutes in, he spoke. "They kept me in a room," he said, "for a while. I don't know how many days. There wasn't a window." Her hand stayed steady on the wheel. "Did anyone hurt you?" "Not like... They didn't..." He stopped, reconsidered. "They needed me to get something, from my father, so they kept me until they got it." "Did they get it?" A pause. "I don't know. I got out before..." He stopped again. "There was a moment when they weren't watching closely enough, so I ran." "That was brave," she said. He made a small dismissive sound that reminded her weirdly of her patients when they'd done something genuinely difficult and didn't want to be praised for it. "It was just a gap," he said. "I just ran at a gap." The address took her down a private road she almost missed. No signage, just a break in the tree line where the pavement changed texture. She followed it for nearly half a mile before the gates came into view. They were enormous. Iron, older looking than the wall they were set into, with a camera housing above each post that was absolutely not older than 5 years. Beyond them, lit from below, sat a house that was technically a mansion, in the same way that a warship is technically a boat. Nora stopped the car. Before she'd fully processed what to do next, the gates were already opening, and that meant someone had seen them on the camera, which meant someone had been watching the road, which meant there was security, which meant the address the boy had given her wasn't just an address. It was a fortress. You should stay in the car, Elias said, opening his door. I'm not staying in the car. He looked at her. My father's men can be. I drove you 20 minutes through a storm at midnight. I'm not staying in the car. He got out. She got out. Two men materialized from the darkness of the gatehouse. Large, quiet, wearing the kind of blank professional expression that is not a natural human expression, and stopped when they saw the boy. Something moved through both of them then. Not sentimentality. Something more functional, a shift in posture, a recalibration. One of them spoke rapidly into a radio. The other looked at Nora. Who are you? He said. She brought me, Elias said simply, as if this settled everything. Neither man argued. Inside the house, Elias was taken immediately by a woman who appeared from an interior doorway, older, gray-haired, whose composure broke completely when she saw him. She spoke to him rapidly in Italian, and he answered in English, and she grabbed his face with both hands and just held it for a moment. And even watching from the hallway, Nora felt the reality of the week this woman had lived telescoped into those few seconds. She stood near the door and waited and told herself she would leave as soon as someone acknowledged her, because she was exhausted and done, and the boy was safe now, and that was what mattered. The room she was standing in told her things she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Not ostentatious, that was the first thing. No gold fixtures, no needless display. The furniture was expensive and old and chosen by someone with taste rather than someone trying to demonstrate wealth. There were books on 2 full walls, a chess set on a side table, mid-game, a framed photograph of a shoreline at dawn that was the only art in the room, positioned where the light from the hallway hit it best. She was still looking at the photograph when she heard the footsteps. Not loud, not hurried, just very deliberate, the way powerful people move when they've learned that pace communicates everything. She turned. The man who came through the doorway was somewhere in his mid-40s, with dark hair gone silver at the temples, and a face that had been handsome before life had worked on it and was still striking for what life had left. He was wearing a suit jacket that had been put on in a hurry over a shirt that wasn't buttoned all the way, and there was nothing careful about his appearance except his eyes, which were doing in 2 seconds what most people couldn't do in 2 minutes, reading her, cataloging her, deciding exactly who she was and why she was in his house. He didn't say anything for a moment, neither did she. Then, Elias said you found him at a bus stop. He was sitting in the rain, she said. Anyone would have stopped. No, Damien Moretti said. They wouldn't. He crossed the room to the side table, not toward her, at an angle to her, and poured 2 glasses of something from a cut glass decanter without asking whether she wanted any. He set one on the table nearest her. She didn't pick it up. He's all right, he said. He needs sleep, food, and probably someone to talk to professionally about what he went through. The marks on his wrists are superficial, zip ties, probably 3 to 5 days of wear. But they'll heal. Physically, he's not in bad shape. Whatever else he's carrying, that's harder to assess. Something moved through his face. Fast, controlled, and gone before she could name it. You're a nurse, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Your name. Nora Whitlock. He picked up his glass and turned to look at her directly, and she had the disorienting experience of being the complete, undivided focus of someone who was clearly not accustomed to having his attention go unremarked upon. I owe you something, he said. Name it. I don't want anything. Everyone wants something. I want to go home, she said. I've been on shift for 11 hours. I brought your son back because leaving him at a bus stop in the rain wasn't something I was capable of doing. That's the beginning and end of it. He looked at her for a long moment, not sizing her up. He'd already done that. Something else. Something she couldn't name. He set his glass down and reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and withdrew a card, matte black, no logo, a single phone number in silver print, and held it out to her. If anything changes, he said, anything at all. She took it, not because she intended to use it, because refusing would have made the moment into something it didn't need to be, and she was too tired for unnecessary friction. My people will drive you home, he said. I have my own car. Your car stays here tonight. You're in no condition to drive 2 hours and you know it. He held up a hand before she could respond. I'm not asking. My driver takes you home. Your car is returned to you in the morning. That is a non-negotiable courtesy and the least I can do. She was exhausted enough that arguing felt like a cost she couldn't afford. She nodded once. She didn't sleep in the car. She sat in the back of an armored SUV with leather seats and blacked-out windows and held the matte black card between two fingers and thought about the boy's face when the woman grabbed him in the hallway. The way his composure had lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and then, just for a second, cracked open into something that was simply a child being held by someone who loved him. She got home at 3 in the morning. She put the card on her kitchen counter, got into the shower, stood under the hot water until her hands stopped shaking from adrenaline and cold and everything else, and then went to bed. She did not expect to sleep. She was unconscious within 4 minutes. The card sat on the kitchen counter through the next morning, through the afternoon, through the evening when she got back from a 6-hour shift that was mercifully uneventful by comparison. She moved it twice, once when she wiped the counter, once when it fell behind the coffee maker, and both times she put it back where it had been without examining why. She threw it in the kitchen trash at 9:30 that night. She dug it out at 9:42. She put it in the drawer next to the takeout menus and told herself that was where it was staying. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about a lot of things, as it turned out. About how safe her life had been before that Tuesday night. About how quickly ordinary life could come apart when the wrong people decided you'd seen too much. About her own threshold, the place where competence stopped being enough and survival required something harder. But all of that was coming, and it was coming faster than she could have imagined, standing in her kitchen at 9:43 in the evening, putting a black card in a drawer with the takeout menus, telling herself the story was already over. The story was nowhere close to over. 3 days after she put the card in the drawer, Nora went back to work and tried to believe her life was still the same shape it had been before Tuesday night. It wasn't. She knew it the way you know a tooth is loose before you actually touch it. A background awareness. Something slightly off in the architecture of ordinary things. She noticed the car parked across from her building 2 mornings in a row. Dark sedan, different plates each time, same stillness. She noticed the man at the coffee cart near the hospital entrance, who was there when she arrived and still there when she came out for a break 4 hours later, nursing the same cup in 20-degree weather. She noticed the way her charge nurse, Diana, looked at her once on Thursday afternoon, a quick sideways assessment, and then looked away too fast. She told herself she was being paranoid. She was sleep-deprived, and her nervous system had been running hot since Monday night, and her brain was doing what brains do when they've been overstimulated, manufacturing threat. She made herself focus. She had patience. She had a job. She was halfway through a 12-hour shift on Friday when the men came through the emergency room doors. There were 4 of them. Not patience. She clocked that in the first second. The gait was wrong, too deliberate, the kind of walk that isn't going anywhere. It's moving through. 2 peeled off immediately toward the security desk. The other 2 came straight down the center of the room, past the triage bay, past the waiting chairs where a woman was holding a sleeping toddler, and the one in front, heavy-set, with a jaw like a cinder block and a cut above his left eye that was 3 days old and hadn't been cleaned properly, put both hands flat on the nurse's station counter and leaned in. "Rodrigo Salinas," he said. "He was brought in last night. Gunshot." Diana looked up from her computer. Her face did something complicated in about half a second. "I can't give patient information to—" "I didn't ask for information," he said. "I asked where he is." Nora was 6 feet away behind the station, holding a medication chart she'd stopped reading. She could see the shape under the second man's jacket. She could see the security guard at the desk, frozen in a conversation with the other 2 men that wasn't going anywhere good. "Sir," Diana said, and her voice was steady. Nora would think about that later, how steady Diana's voice was. "I need you to step back from the counter." The man didn't step back. He leaned in further, and his voice dropped. And whatever he said next, Nora didn't hear because the blood was too loud in her ears, and she was already moving, not toward him, away from the station and toward the wall panel where the emergency button was. The one that went directly to the hospital security desk and the external line simultaneously. She got within 2 feet of it. The second man's hand came down on her wrist. Not violently, precisely. The way you catch something before it falls. "Don't," he said. Not loud. He didn't need to be loud. She looked at his hand on her wrist. She looked at his face. He was younger than the other one, maybe 30, maybe less, with the kind of eyes that had seen enough to stop reacting to most things. "I have patients in this room," she said. "There is a child in Bay 3. Then nobody does anything stupid, he said, and the child stays fine. The room had gone quiet in that specific way. Emergency rooms go quiet when the people in them have registered that something is wrong but haven't yet decided what to do about it. The toddler was still asleep. A man in Bay 2 with a broken wrist was staring at the curtained partition. A nurse Nora knew by sight, younger, recent hire, named Petra or Pietra, had pressed herself against the far wall with her hand over her mouth. Nora stood very still and breathed through her nose and counted the exits. Then the power in the east wing flickered twice and went out. In the 5 seconds of semi-darkness before the emergency generators kicked in, several things happened in a sequence she would only be able to reconstruct later, piece by piece, the way you reconstruct something that happened too fast for linear memory. The man holding her wrist made a sound, short, surprised. His grip loosened. She pulled her arm back. There were other people in the room now. She hadn't heard them come in. They were simply there, positioned at angles that made no tactical sense unless you'd planned it in advance, which they clearly had. 3 of them. Dark clothing, no logos, the same professional blankness as the men at Damian Moretti's gate. The 2 men who had come for Rodrigo Salinas looked at the 3 men who had appeared from nowhere, and the math in the room changed. The heavy-set one at the counter straightened up. He looked at the man nearest him, one of Damian's, Nora understood now, without anyone having told her, and said nothing. The other man said nothing either. It lasted maybe 4 seconds, this silence, and it contained an entire conversation. Then the heavy-set man stepped back from the counter. "This isn't done," he said. "No," said the man from the darkness. "It's not." They left. All 4 of them, in the same unhurried walk they'd come in with, as if the whole thing had been a formality they'd needed to complete before the next item on the agenda. The 3 who had appeared, Damian's men, remained at their positions for another 30 seconds, then folded themselves back toward the exits without a word or a backward glance. The generator hum settled into the walls. The lights stabilized. The toddler woke up and started to cry. Diana came around the counter and put her hand on Nora's arm. "You okay?" "No," Nora said honestly. "What the hell just happened?" Diana looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at the doors, then back at Nora. "I think," she said carefully, "that you have a guardian angel with very specific operational protocols." Nora went home that night and sat at her kitchen table for 40 minutes without turning the lights on. The drawer was 2 feet away. She didn't open it. She sat with her hands flat on the table and her breath coming slower than it wanted to. And she thought about the hand on her wrist, the weight and precision of it, the message inside the gesture, which was, "We know you're here and you can't stop us, and your alarm system is irrelevant." She thought about the 3 men who had appeared from nowhere. She thought about Damian Moretti's face when she'd told him she didn't want anything. She opened the drawer. The card was under the takeout menus where she'd put it. She picked it up and turned it over in her hands. Matte black, 1 number, nothing else. No name, no identifier. He wouldn't need one. Nobody who had this number would need to be told whose it was. She put it back in the drawer. She put on the kettle. She made tea she didn't drink. She stood at her window and looked at the street below, and after 3 minutes she spotted the car. Different model, same stillness. And something cold moved through her chest that was not quite fear and not quite anger, and was actually, she realized, the specific sensation of understanding that you are no longer in control of your own perimeter. She went back to the drawer and took the card out and called the number. It rang once. "I expected this call sooner," Damian said. No greeting, no surprise. "I wasn't sure I was going to make it," she said. "And now?" "There were men at my hospital today." A pause. Short. "I know." "You know." She set the card down on the counter. "Your people were already there." "Yes." "You've been watching me." It wasn't a question. "I've been watching the situation," he said. The distinction seemed to matter to him. "And the situation is what exactly?" Another pause. This one, longer. She could hear the quality of wherever he was. The slight echo of a large room, the ambient silence of a place where ambient noise has been managed. "The men who took Elias," he said, "they know you drove him home. They don't know what he told you during that drive. They are operating on the assumption that he told you everything." "He didn't tell me anything." "I know that. You know that. They don't know that. She leaned against the counter. Her knees felt like they'd decided to stop cooperating. So they think I'm a liability, he said. Yes. The word landed flat and specific. I need to call the police, she said. You can do that. No inflection, just the sentence. But the men who came to your hospital today are not independent. They belong to a larger structure that has people in that structure. Whether those people include police, I don't know. Whether they're willing to use them based on what they've demonstrated in the last 72 hours, I think you can make your own assessment. She was quiet for a moment. So what are you saying? I'm saying that you made a decision 10 days ago that made you part of something you didn't ask to be part of. His voice was flat, not apologetic, not cruel, just accurate. And the options available to you now are narrower than they were before you made that decision. You're telling me I have no options. I'm telling you the options you have are not the ones you're used to having. She pressed her fists lightly against the counter, breathed. And you, what do you want? What I want, Damien said, is for my son to have grown up never knowing this world. That option closed some time ago. A beat. What I want now is to fix what I can fix. You are something I can fix, if you let me. Fix, she said. That's a word for it. What word would you prefer? She didn't have one. She looked at the window, at the car she could still see parked below, at the rain that had started again while she'd been on the phone, because apparently this city only had one weather setting. If I say yes to whatever you're about to propose, she said, what does that mean? What does it actually mean for my life? It means your life changes, he said. Significantly. Not permanently. I can get you back to something close to what you had. But for a period of time, yes, significantly. How significant? You'd need to leave your apartment. Your job would need to be suspended. Not terminated, suspended. And I can arrange that in a way that doesn't damage your record. And you'd need to come somewhere I can guarantee your security. Somewhere being your house. Yes, she laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the specific laugh that comes out when something is so absurd that it bypasses the filters. You want me to move into your house? I want you to not be dead, he said. Flat. Final. Those two things happen to require the same arrangement, at least temporarily. She stood in her kitchen for a long time after that without speaking. She could hear him on the other end of the line, the quality of his breathing, patient and unhurried, not filling the silence, just waiting in it. She thought about the man's hand on her wrist, about the security guard who had frozen, about Petra or Pietra pressed against the wall, about the toddler who had woken up crying. I need to pack some things, she said. My driver is already outside, Damien said. He's been there since 9. The car she'd noticed from the window. Of course. She hung up without saying anything else because she didn't trust what she might say, and she needed her hands to do something useful, which was to throw clothes and medication and her good stethoscope and her mother's photograph into a bag in under 10 minutes, because that was apparently all the time her life had left in it. She did it in 8. The man who met her at the street door was different from the driver who'd taken her home the first night. Younger. He didn't introduce himself. He took her bag, put it in the trunk without being asked, and held the door. She got in. The interior smelled like leather and something faint she couldn't identify. The city moved past the blacked-out windows in fragments, lit doorways, headlights, the orange blur of traffic signals. She'd lived in this city for 11 years. She'd never ridden through it in an armored car before. Nobody spoke the whole way. She was delivered to the gate, processed through with the same blank efficiency as before, and brought inside the house to a room that was clearly a guest room, but had been prepared with a specificity that suggested she was expected. Fresh flowers on the side table, a lamp on, the radiator warm. She stood in the center of the room for a moment with her bag at her feet and the full weight of the last 20 minutes pressing down from all sides. She didn't unpack. She sat on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands and sat that way for about 2 minutes. Then she stood up, squared her shoulders, went back into the hallway, and went looking for Damien Moretti. She found him in what she would later understand was his working room. Not an office, not a study, something more functional than either, with 2 monitors on a long table and maps on the walls that she didn't let herself look at too closely. He was standing with his back to the door, talking to a man she hadn't seen before, mid-50s, The kind of build that suggests a body kept in operational readiness despite age, with a scar along his jaw that was old enough to be part of his face now. They stopped talking when she walked in. "You packed my things," she said. Damien turned. The other man looked at her with no particular expression and then looked at Damien. "My people retrieved some essentials from your apartment this afternoon," Damien said. "As a precaution." "You went into my apartment?" "Yes." "Without asking me. You hadn't agreed to come yet." The absurdity of it, the sheer compressed arrogance of that logic, hit her somewhere behind the sternum. "So you just decided, on my behalf, that I would agree?" "I decided that if you agreed, you would need your things, and if you didn't agree, the cost of retrieving them unnecessarily was negligible." He said it without apology, without any visible awareness that it required one. "Your succulent is on the kitchen windowsill." She stared at him. "You brought my plant." "You seemed attached to it." The man with the scar on his jaw looked at the middle distance and said nothing. She pressed her knuckles against the doorframe once, hard, grounding the impact. "We need rules," she said. "If I'm here, if this is actually happening, I need to understand the boundaries, mine and yours." Damien considered her for a moment. Then he said something she didn't expect. "All right." She blinked. "All right, tell me what you need." She hadn't prepared for him to say yes, which was the problem. She'd expected resistance, deflection, the autocratic wave-off that his manner suggested, and the yes landed off-center. She recovered. "I need to know what's happening, not managed versions of it, not information rationed for my comfort. What is actually happening, who these people are, why they're willing to walk into a hospital in broad daylight, all of it." "That's a significant request." "You put me in the middle of a war I didn't start," she said. "The least you owe me is a map." The man with the scar made a sound that might have been the precursor to something, a word, a laugh, but Damien's look silenced it before it arrived. "Tomorrow," Damien said. "Tonight you sleep. Tomorrow I'll tell you what you need to know." "And Elias?" Something changed in his face. Small. He controlled it quickly. "He's here. He's been asking about you." That shouldn't have mattered as much as it did. She didn't let it show. "Okay," she said. "Tomorrow." She turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing." "Yes." "The man at the hospital, the one who grabbed my wrist." She turned back just far enough to see his face. "What happened to him?" Damien's expression was completely unreadable. "He won't be doing it again," he said. She nodded once. She went back to the guest room and sat on the bed and listened to the silence of the house settle around her, the thickness of walls built to withstand things. Ordinary walls aren't expected to withstand. And she thought about Elias asking about her, and about her succulent on an unfamiliar kitchen windowsill, and about the particular look in Damien's eyes when she'd asked about the man who grabbed her wrist. Not anger, not pride, something quieter. The look of a man who had made a decision and would not revisit it. She was asleep by midnight. She was awake at 3:17 by the sound of vehicles on the property. Fast, more than one, the crunch of gravel under tires moving at a speed that said urgency without saying emergency. She got to the window in time to see lights cutting across the outer grounds. Then she heard voices in the hallway. Multiple, overlapping, moving fast. And then the sound of running feet, which in a house full of trained men was not a sound she expected to hear, because trained men don't run unless the calculation has already been made and the math came out badly. She opened her door. A man she recognized from the night she'd arrived, one of the gate guards, was moving past at speed and stopped when he saw her. "Stay in your room," he said. "What's happening?" "Ma'am, I'm a nurse," she said. "If someone's hurt, I need to know." He looked at her for 1 second, then, "Downstairs, the East Hall. 2 of ours came in from the Harwick operation." He stopped himself. "There's 2 men down. Bad." She was already moving. She had no equipment, no kit, nothing except 11 years of emergency nursing and the specific kind of calm that comes not from never being afraid, but from having been afraid enough times that the body knows what to do regardless. She followed him down the main staircase and through a hallway and into a room that had been repurposed before tonight for something medical. A table, a supply cabinet, overhead lights that were too good for a casual guest room annex. And she stopped in the doorway and took in the scene in one sweep. 2 men on makeshift tables. One conscious, one not. The conscious one had a gunshot wound to the upper left shoulder that had gone through and through, which was the better of two bad options. But he was losing blood faster than the pressure bandage someone had applied could manage. The unconscious one had two wounds, abdomen and upper thigh, and his color was the specific gray that meant the internal situation was not waiting for a convenient moment to become critical. "Who applied this bandage?" she said, moving to the shoulder wound first. "I did," said a voice behind her. "Young. One of the guards. Good placement, wrong pressure. Put your hand here." She guided him physically, repositioning. "Hold that. Don't let up. If he passes out, don't let up." She moved to the second man. She needed equipment she didn't have. She needed an OR she didn't have. She ran through what she could see. The thigh wound was the immediate bleed. The abdominal wound needed imaging to assess properly, and she had no imaging. She was working with her hands and her training and whatever this supply cabinet actually contained. She pulled it open. Someone had stocked it. Not comprehensively, not a surgical suite, but deliberately. IV supplies, clotting agents, broad-spectrum antibiotics, suture kits still in packaging, lidocaine, saline bags, a portable BP monitor that was a better model than what they had on her floor at the hospital. She thought, he has a medical kit because he's expected to need one. She thought, I'm standing in a room that was built for this exact situation. She thought, I'm going to need more light. Someone get me a lamp, she said, anything with a directional beam. And I need 2 people in here who are not squeamish. Everyone else out. The room rearranged itself around her without argument. She got to work. She didn't know how long she'd been working when she became aware of Damien standing in the doorway. She didn't stop what she was doing. She was closing the thigh wound and stopping was not an option. But she registered him, the stillness of him in the doorframe, the way he was watching her with the complete absorbed attention of a man who has seen something that is recalibrating something in him. He needs a hospital, she said without looking up. The abdominal wound, and I've done what I can, but I'm operating without imaging, and if there's internal bleeding I can't see, this is not enough. I have a surgeon on the way, Damien said. 20 minutes. Tell him to hurry. I did. She tied off the last suture and straightened up, and her back registered the angle she'd been working at for the last however long with a deep and specific objection. She pressed her fist against her spine for a moment and breathed. The other one? Damien said. Shoulder wound is manageable. He's going to be in pain for a week and he needs antibiotics, but he'll keep. She stripped off the gloves she'd borrowed from the supply cabinet. Who are these men? Mine, he said simply. Who did this to them? He looked at her for a long moment. His face in the inadequate light of the room was older than it had seemed before. Not in years, but in weight, the specific age that accumulates from decisions made and lived with rather than from time past. The same people who came to your hospital, he said. She looked at the man on the table, the conscious one, who was watching her with the dazed gratitude of someone who has just been pulled back from somewhere he didn't want to go. And then she looked back at Damien. Your surgeon, she said. He has full clearance to take the abdominal case? He knows what he's walking into. Then I'll stay until he gets here. After that I need coffee, and I need you to explain to me tonight. Not tomorrow, tonight. What exactly is happening outside these walls? Because whatever truce or arrangement you thought you had with these people has clearly collapsed, and I would like to understand the parameters of the situation I'm currently living inside. Damien looked at her for a moment. Then he said very quietly, yes. Not the autocratic deflection she'd expected. Not negotiation. Just yes. She turned back to her patient and checked his pressure and thought about the word yes in the mouth of a man who looked like he hadn't said it to many people. And she thought about the card in the kitchen drawer that she no longer had a kitchen drawer to put anything in. And she thought about the life she'd had a week ago. The melatonin at 10. The gym membership. The friends she saw 3 times a year. The dying succulent. And she understood, with the specific clarity that comes from standing in a room with 2 gunshot men at 4 in the morning, that she was not going back to any of that. Not tonight. Not in the same form. Maybe not at all. The surgeon arrived in 17 minutes. His name was Renner, and he had the hands of someone who'd done this work in places far less comfortable than this room, and the manner of a man who had stopped asking questions about context some years ago. He nodded at Nora's fieldwork with the brief, precise approval of a professional assessing another professional's output in a crisis, and she stepped back and let him take over. She walked out into the hallway and stood against the wall, and let her body do what it needed to do, which was shake slightly for about 30 seconds. She breathed through it. Her hands steadied. Damien was in the hallway. He'd followed her out. He was leaning against the opposite wall with his arms crossed, and he was watching her with an expression that was difficult to parse. Not pity, not admiration exactly, something more complicated than either. Something she didn't have a word for at 4 in the morning, with blood on her borrowed clothes and her back screaming from the angle she'd been bent at for an hour. "You didn't hesitate," he said. "Hesitating doesn't help anyone." "Most people hesitate." "Then most people aren't nurses." She pressed the back of her head against the wall and looked at the ceiling. "I need that coffee, and I need that explanation. And I need you to understand that whatever is happening out there is now happening in here. And I am not a soldier, and I am not staff, and I am not a prisoner. And however you categorize what I am right now, you need to factor in that I am someone who is very tired and very much done with being managed." Damien was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. And the specific weight of those two words, not an apology, not a concession, but an acknowledgement carrying real mass, landed somewhere she hadn't expected anything from him to land. She looked at him. He looked back. Down the hall, through the closed door, she could hear Renner working. Outside the walls, she couldn't hear, but she understood now that outside the walls, something had changed tonight. Not a skirmish, not a demonstration, but an escalation past whatever invisible line had previously held. The men who had come to her hospital, who had taken Elias, who had sent 2 of Damien's people back broken. They had made a decision that couldn't be unmade. And she was inside the walls when they made it. There was no version of tonight that ended with her leaving in the morning. She understood that now with a clarity that bypassed argument. She could be angry about it, and she was, somewhere underneath the exhaustion and the adrenaline, she was genuinely furious. But anger was a luxury for people who still had the option of walking out the door, and that option had closed sometime in the last 4 hours without anyone asking her permission. She was here. The walls were around her, and the man across the hallway, the one who had brought her succulent, who had said yes when she expected no, who had watched her work with that expression she still didn't have a word for, was the only thing standing between her and what was outside. She pushed off the wall. "Coffee," she said. "Then talk." The kitchen was larger than her apartment had been. She sat at the end of a long oak table with a mug of coffee that one of the staff, a quiet woman named Bessa, who moved through the house like she'd been there since it was built, had produced without being asked, and she waited for Damien to start talking. He sat across from her with his own coffee untouched, and a manila folder on the table between them that he hadn't opened yet. The kitchen was the most human room she'd seen in the house. Not warm exactly, but used, with the particular disorder of a space where real things happened rather than a space designed to suggest they did. There were dishes in the drying rack, a child's drawing held to the refrigerator with a magnet, Elias's, she assumed, blocky and enthusiastic, depicting what might have been a dog or a small bear. "The family that took Elias," Damien said, "is called Vasca, Armand Vasca. He runs the Eastern Corridor, distribution primarily, with enforcement structures that overlap into 3 neighboring territories. He spoke the way people speak when they've explained something many times and have stripped it down to the load-bearing facts. For 2 years we maintained an arrangement, not an alliance. An arrangement. Defined boundaries, defined commerce, mutual non-interference." "What changed?" He looked at his coffee. "I made a decision about a port contract. Vasca believed it belonged to him by prior agreement. I believed the agreement had expired." He paused. Both positions had merit. Neither of us was willing to revisit the question. "So this is a business dispute," she said. "All of it is a business dispute," he said flatly. "The kidnapping was leverage. The men who came to your hospital were pressure. What happened tonight?" He stopped. "Tonight was a message." "What kind of message?" "That Vasca has decided the arrangement is finished. That he's moving to consolidate, and consolidation requires eliminating me first." He finally looked up. "My intelligence on his operation has been accurate for 2 years. His movements, his personnel, his hierarchy. I've had a reliable picture. In the last 3 weeks, that picture has been wrong in ways I cannot account for." She felt something tighten at the base of her skull. "Wrong how?" 3 operations went badly. Not catastrophically, but badly. Wrong timing, wrong positions, targets that had moved before we arrived. The two men. Renner is working on tonight. They walked into an ambush at a location that only 6 people in my organization knew about. She set her mug down. 6 people, she said. Yes. She looked at him. He looked back. He didn't say the word. He didn't need to. You have someone inside, she said. I have someone inside, he said. I don't know who. The silence that followed had a specific texture, not empty, loaded, the kind of silence that sits in a room and makes all the furniture slightly less solid. Does that change my situation? She said. It means the people who know you're here are the same 6 people, one of whom is feeding information to Vasca. He said it without softening it. She'd asked not to be managed, and he was honoring that, and she wasn't entirely sure she was grateful. So being here might not be safer than being out there. It's safer than being out there alone, he said. Whether it's safe in absolute terms? No. I can't tell you it is. She picked her mug back up just to have something to do with her hands. You're very honest about that. Would you prefer I wasn't? No. She drank. The coffee was better than anything she'd made at home for years. I'd prefer the situation were different, but since it isn't, I'll take honest. He nodded once. Then he said, The surgeon is going to want you when he's done. Renner doesn't know this house's medical protocols. I'm aware. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She looked at him. I'm a nurse. Someone's in there recovering from abdominal surgery in a converted spare room. I'm going to be there when he needs monitoring, not because you need me to be, but because that's what I do. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the hallway, the expression she still didn't have a word for. She decided to stop trying to find one and just let it exist. She went back to the patient at 5:30. She stayed until 8. Renner was competent and efficient and largely silent, and they worked alongside each other with the economic shorthand of 2 people who both knew what they were doing and didn't need to perform it. The abdominal case was stable. The shoulder wound was angry but manageable. By the time daylight came through the high windows of the repurposed room, both men were asleep, and Renner was writing notes in a hand so small it was nearly illegible. You do this a lot? He said, not looking up. Emergency nursing. Not quite this. You're good. Simple. Factual. He capped his pen. Better than some people I've worked with in actual facilities. Where do you usually work? He looked up then. His eyes were a pale, tired gray. Wherever Moretti needs me. He said it without discomfort. She absorbed it. She was absorbing a lot of things about this world that required a specific, deliberate act of acceptance. Not approval, just the acknowledgement that things were what they were, and the sooner she stopped expecting them to be different, the clearer her thinking would be. She went upstairs to change. She showered in the attached bathroom of the guest room and stood for a moment under hot water with her palms flat against the tile and let the events of the night move through her in some organized fashion. The drive. The hospital. The man's hand on her wrist. The call. The car. Packing in 8 minutes. The 2 men downstairs. The surgery. The word yes in the hallway and the way it had landed. She was thinking about all of that when she heard Elias's voice. He was in the room across the hall. She could hear him through the door, talking to someone, and she caught fragments. Something about a game, something about not being hungry, something with the specific cadence of a child negotiating with an adult over something the child has already decided. She got dressed and opened her door and knocked on his. A pause. Then, "Come in." He was sitting cross-legged on his bed with a book open in his lap that he was clearly not reading. The woman she'd seen the first night, the gray-haired one who'd grabbed his face in the hallway, was sitting in the chair by the window with the expression of someone who has been maintaining a vigil for some time and is too proud to admit it's wearing on her. "You're still here," Elias said. "I'm still here," Nora confirmed. "I heard something last night." He said it carefully, watching her face for the thing adults' faces did when they were about to manage him. People moving, voices. "Some of your father's men needed medical attention. They're okay." She kept it direct. He'd read evasion immediately. "Nothing for you to worry about." He looked at her. "I'm not worried," he said. "I'm used to it." He said it with the matter-of-fact steadiness of a child stating a preference in breakfast food, and it landed harder than anything that had happened in the last 12 hours. She sat down on the edge of his bed without being invited, and he didn't move away. "That doesn't mean it's okay," she said. He thought about that. "I know," he said, "but it's still true." She stayed with him for 40 minutes. They didn't talk about anything significant. He showed her the book, which was about deep-sea creatures, and which he'd clearly read multiple times given the dog-eared pages and the confident way he moved through it. He told her that the anglerfish's light was a modified fin spine and that most people got that wrong. She said she hadn't known that. He seemed genuinely pleased. She left when Bessa arrived with his breakfast and went back downstairs and found the house in a different configuration than it had been at 4 in the morning. More men, moving with controlled purpose between rooms. A large table in what she understood to be the working room had been cleared and reset with papers and a laptop, and the man with the scar on his jaw, whose name she still didn't know, was on the phone in the corner, speaking quietly in a language she didn't recognize at first, and then identified as Albanian. Damien was at the table. He looked up when she came in. "Renner says the abdominal case is stable." "Renner's right. He'll need monitoring every 2 hours, and I want to know immediately if his pressure drops below 90 systolic." She came to the table. "What's happening?" Damien looked at the man in the corner. The man ended his call and looked at Nora with the same unreadable assessment he'd offered the night before. "This is Cass," Damien said. "He runs my operational structure." "The 6 people," she said. Cass looked at Damien. Damien nodded. "The 6 people," Cass confirmed. His voice was low and precisely accented. "We're running assessment on each of them. It takes time to do correctly. If we move too fast and alert the wrong person, whoever it is goes dark and we lose the thread." "How long?" "Days. Maybe more. And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, we operate on reduced information and hope Vasca doesn't know that we know." She pulled a chair out and sat down. Neither man indicated this was unwelcome. "What can I do?" Both men looked at her. "I mean it," she said. "I'm not going to sit in a guest room for days. I'm not built that way. I need to be useful, or I'm going to lose my mind and become a problem." Cass looked at Damien. "She's direct," he said. Not a criticism. "Consistently," Damien said. Something moved briefly across his face that might, under different circumstances, have been the precursor to a smile. "Renner needs someone who knows what they're doing to share monitoring duties. That's practical, and it keeps you in the house." "Done," she said. "What else?" "Elias," Damien said. Quieter. "He's been, since the kidnapping, the nights are bad. He doesn't complain, he doesn't tell me, but the staff reports that he's rarely asleep before 3. She thought about the deep-sea creature book, dog-eared from being read in the small hours when the house was quiet. "He showed me his book this morning," she said. "He's okay. He's scared and he's managing it the only way he knows how, which is to pretend he isn't. He could use someone to talk to who isn't staff and isn't his father." "Are you volunteering?" "I'm observing." She paused. "But yes." The working rhythm of the day settled around her like something she hadn't expected to fit into and did. She checked on the patients at 10, at noon, at 2. She ate lunch at the kitchen table with Bessa and a young guard named Porto, who turned out to be intensely interested in American football and spent 20 minutes explaining a specific play he believed had cost his team a championship 3 seasons ago with a specificity and passion that she found genuinely endearing. In the afternoon, she sat with Elias for an hour, and they did not talk about deep-sea creatures or kidnappers or anything of weight. They watched a nature documentary about migration patterns, and he informed her twice of facts the narration had gotten slightly wrong. It felt almost like a life. She knew it wasn't. She knew the shape of what she was actually inside, the walls, the cameras, the men at the perimeter, the 2 patients downstairs, the traitor somewhere in the 6-person circle, Vasca outside planning something she couldn't see. She knew all of that. But in the spaces between knowing it, the day had something ordinary in it, and ordinary was something she hadn't expected to find. She was with Elias when it broke. 7:15 in the evening. The documentary had moved on to something about coral reefs, and Elias had fallen asleep against the arm of the couch, in the boneless, sudden way children fell asleep when they finally stopped fighting it. She'd put a blanket over him and was about to find Bessa when she heard the voices downstairs. Not raised, controlled. but the specific controlled quality of voices that are choosing to be controlled because the alternative is worse. She went to the top of the stairs. Damien's voice, Cass's voice, and a third, a woman's, which she hadn't heard before in this house. She went down. The working room, door open. She stood in the doorway and took in the scene. Damien at the table with his hands flat on the surface, the same posture as the nurse's station at the hospital, contained force. Cass in the corner again, arms crossed, jaw set. And in the center of the room, standing with the specific stillness of someone who has decided how this conversation is going to go and is waiting for everyone else to arrive at the same conclusion, was a woman in her early 50s, dark coat, good shoes, the kind of face that had been beautiful and was now formidable, which was better. She saw Nora in the doorway and didn't react, which told Nora she'd known she was there before she arrived. "Dr. Whitlock?" the woman said. "Nurse Whitlock," Nora said. "Who are you?" "My name is Elena Vasca," the woman said. "Armand Vasca's wife." The room held its breath. Nora looked at Damien. His expression gave her nothing. She looked back at Elena Vasca. "You're in the middle of your husband's house," Nora said. "I'm in Damien Moretti's house," Elena said, "which is where I need to be." She turned to Damien. "You have a leak. I know who it is. And I'm here because what my husband is planning for the next 48 hours is something I am not willing to be part of." Damien didn't move. "You came here alone?" "Yes." "How did you get past my perimeter?" A pause. "The same way information has been getting out," Elena said. "Through Marco." Cass uncrossed his arms slowly. Marco. The name meant nothing to Nora, but the way it landed in the room, the way Cass's face went to stone and Damien's hands pressed harder against the table, told her everything about what it meant to the men in front of her. "Marco Dieri," Cass said. Flat. The words had no inflection left in them. "Yes," Elena said. Damien straightened up. He looked at Cass, and something passed between them that wasn't a look so much as a decision being made in real time, and Nora watched both men absorb a piece of information that was reconfiguring something fundamental. "He's been with me for 11 years, Damien said. "He's been with Vasca for 4, Elena said. "The last 4. Long enough to build something that looks like loyalty from the inside." She took a breath. "My husband recruited him after your contract dispute over the Harwick distribution. Marco was, he felt passed over. That's how Armand frames it. He finds the ones who feel passed over." The silence had a new quality now, denser. "Why are you telling me this?" Damien said. Elena looked at him. Her face was doing several things simultaneously. The weariness of a woman who has known things too long without being able to say them. The resolve of someone who has finally made the larger of 2 bad choices. "Because my husband's plan for tomorrow night isn't a business operation," she said. "It's a massacre. He's going to take the house, everyone in it." She paused. "There is a boy in this house." The air in the room changed again. Nora felt it go cold around the edges of her vision. She gripped the doorframe once, hard. Damien's voice when it came was very quiet. "Where's Marco now?" "He left an hour ago," Cass said. "I saw him leave. I thought—" He stopped. His jaw was tight enough that she could see the muscle in it from across the room. "He said he had a family situation. I let him go." Damien looked at him, not with anger, with something worse. The specific look of a man recalculating everything he thought he knew about the last 4 years. 48 hours, Damien said to Elena. "You said 48. I said that's what is planned, but Marco is compromised now. He knows I've come here. If he reports that, the timeline moves." Elena's voice was steady. "You may have tonight. You may not." Nora stepped fully into the room. Every head turned. "Elias is upstairs," she said. "I know," Damien said. "He's asleep on the couch." Her voice was level. "Whatever you're deciding right now, you need to factor in that he is upstairs asleep on the couch. And whatever happens next, he cannot be in this house if this house is a target." "She's right," Cass said. First time he'd agreed with her on anything. Damien looked at her for a moment. Then he moved. The first decisive movement she'd seen from him since Elena Vasca had walked in, and picked up the radio from the table. "Get Torres," he said into it. "Get him up." He looked at Nora. "The bunker," he said. "Below the east wing. Torres will take you and Elias there now. Cass will brief you on the route. I'm not leaving my patients. Renner doesn't know their charts. Renner doesn't know where we left their pressures 2 hours ago, or what their pain tolerances are, or what... She stopped, breathed, steady. I will take Elias to wherever you're putting him, and I will stay with him. But the patients need to come with us, or I need to stay near them. Damien looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. She was not backing down, and he could see that, and she could see him seeing it. Move them, he said to Cass. All of it. The equipment, the supply kit, everything Renner needs. The bunker has the space. It'll take an hour, Cass said. Then start now. Elena Vasca had been standing still through all of this. She spoke again. There's one more thing. Damien looked at her. The reason I know the detail of what Armand is planning, she said, is because he told me. He tells me things. She paused. He told me because he wanted me to understand that it was going to happen, that it was already decided, that Moretti's name was finished regardless of what anyone did. Her eyes moved briefly to Nora, then back. He didn't know I'd act on it. He thought I'd accept it. What changed? Damien said. Elena's expression shifted, not softened, something more fundamental than that. There's a nurse in your house, she said, someone who has no business being in any of this. My husband put her in the middle of it anyway. He put a child in the middle of it. Her voice was completely level. I have a limit. I found it. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Nora said, Where is your husband right now? At the Aldrich compound, east of the city, 40 minutes. Is he expecting you back tonight? Elena looked at her. The assessment in that look was thorough and fast. He'll expect a call within the hour. If I don't make it, he'll know. Make the call, Damien said. And say what? That you're handling something, that you'll be back late. His voice had changed, the surface quality of it, the way it carried. Something underneath had engaged, some operational register that hadn't been present before. Can you do that? I've been managing my husband's suspicions for 4 years, Elena said. Dry, specific. Yes, I can do that. She took out her phone. She moved to the far end of the room. They heard her voice, warm, slightly tired, the very particular performance of a woman calling her husband at the end of a long day. And it was the most unsettling thing Nora had witnessed in a house that had given her a significant amount to choose from. Cass pulled out his own phone and stepped close to Damien. Marco is at the safe house on Birch, he said quietly. Lena had him tracked after last week's breach, just in case. He doesn't know she did. A pause. We can move on him in the next 30 minutes. Don't move on him yet, Damien said. Cass frowned. He's burning everything. He's the only line we have to Vasca's real-time operational picture. If we take him now, we blind ourselves to anything that changes in the next 24 hours. Damien's voice was completely controlled. We watch him, we use him, then we take him. Cass absorbed this, nodded once. It was the nod of a man who disagreed but respected the logic. Nora was halfway back to the door when she stopped. Something was wrong. Not the situational wrong she'd been wading through for the last 24 hours. Something else. Something at the edge of what she was seeing that wasn't at. Elena Vasca was finishing her call, her posture, her voice, the warm goodbye, all of it completely controlled. And then she lowered the phone and her face changed back to what it was when she'd walked in. The formidable, exhausted face of a woman who has made a choice she can't unmake. And Nora looked at that face and at the timeline and at the specific piece of information that was sitting at the edge of her thoughts and finally walked up to it directly. How did you get through the perimeter? She said. Elena turned. I told you, Marco left an hour ago. You said that yourself. Nora kept her voice completely level. Your husband is at the Aldrich compound, 40 minutes east. You drove here, cleared the perimeter, and came inside. That's how long? When did you leave the compound? Elena held her gaze. 2 hours ago. So you left before Marco did. The room went very still. Nora looked at Damien. He was already looking at her, and something in his face was moving. The same rapid recalibration she'd seen when Elena had first said Marco's name. You didn't come through the perimeter because Marco cleared it for you, Nora said. You came through because someone else did. Someone who is still here. Elena Vasca didn't speak. But she didn't deny it, and the 3 seconds of silence, while she chose not to deny it, said everything. Cass moved. Not toward Elena, toward the door, cutting off the exit, the movement so fast and practiced that it was nearly invisible. "Who else?" Damien said. His voice had gone completely flat. Elena looked at him. Her composure was still intact, barely. Around the edges it was showing the strain now. "I need something from you first," she said. "You're not in a position to negotiate." "I'm in the only position," she said, "because whoever I came in with is still in this house, and I'm the only person who knows who it is. And your timeline just got shorter because they heard everything that was said in this room tonight." She paused. "I need something from you first. Then I'll give you the name." The silence lasted 3 seconds. 4, 5. Damien looked at Nora once, a brief, specific look that she understood was not asking for permission or input, but was simply acknowledging that she was in the room and that what was about to happen was happening in front of her, and that there was nothing either of them could do about that. Then he looked back at Elena. "What do you need?" he said. "My daughter," Elena said. "She's 17. She's at school in the city. I need her out before tomorrow night. I need your word that she gets out clean and that nothing that happens between you and Armand touches her." Damien looked at the table, at his hands on it. "You have my word," he said. Elena exhaled, just once, controlled. Then, "The person who came with me tonight is in your medical suite. He's been there for 45 minutes. She paused. "His name is Dr. Renner." The world didn't stop. It just rearranged itself. Nora heard the words and her body processed them before her mind did. She felt it in her hands first, the cold that moved up from her palms to her wrists to her elbows, the specific cold of understanding that the man she'd been working next to for the last several hours, the man she'd deferred to and respected and moved efficiently alongside, was the reason the 2 patients downstairs were downstairs at all. Renner had been treating the men he'd helped put there. She heard herself say, "the patients." Not even a full sentence, just the 2 words. She was already moving before Cass could tell her to stop. She went down the hallway at a pace that was almost running, the kind of speed you move at when the delay between understanding and action has been completely removed, and she pushed through the door to the medical suite and took in the room in one single sweep. The shoulder patient was asleep. Pressure cuff on, reading normal. IV drip running clean. The abdominal patient was awake. He was staring at the ceiling, and his face had the specific gray pallor she associated with internal bleeding, and the IV line running into his arm was not the saline drip she had set up. "When did he change your line?" she said. The man looked at her. His eyes were glassy. "An hour ago," he said it was medication. She had the line pulled from his arm in 4 seconds. She didn't know what was in it. She wouldn't know without a lab. But she knew what was in it wasn't what she'd set up. And she knew that a man who'd helped plan an ambush that put 2 of Damien's soldiers in this room had not come here to help them recover. She started over. New line, clean saline. She worked fast and she didn't let her hand shake, and she talked to the patient while she worked because keeping him conscious and calm was the most useful thing she could do for his pressure until she could properly assess what had been going in. Cass came in behind her, then 2 other men. Renner was not in the room. "Where is he?" she said without turning around. "Gone," Cass said. The single word carried the weight of multiple failures. She kept working. 15 minutes later, she had the abdominal patient stable and had done what she could with what she had, and she straightened up and her back screamed and she let it. Damien was in the doorway. She hadn't heard him arrive. "He's stable," she said. "I don't know what was going in. His pressure dipped, but it's recovering. I need a lab to tell me what Renner put in that line, and I don't have a lab." "We can get one," Damien said. "Get one." She stripped her gloves. "What about Renner?" "He got out through the east side. Cass has people on it." He paused. "He took something with him, from the medical supply cabinet. We're assessing what's missing." She looked at the cabinet. The door was ajar, the careful organization of Renner's initial inventory visibly disrupted in 2 places. "He knew exactly what he was taking," she said. "This wasn't improvised." "No," Damien said. "None of this was improvised." She looked at her hands. Clean, gloves off, but she could still feel the texture of the IV line, the specific wrongness of it when she'd pulled it. She could still feel the 45 minutes of working next to Renner in the small hours, the professional respect she'd had for his competence. The brief, genuine ease of working with someone who knew what they were doing. She could feel the specific weight of having been that wrong about someone. He was very good, she said. The best ones are, Damien said. She looked up at him. The things she'd been moving through tonight, the Elena Vasca reveal, the Marco realization, the perimeter question, the 3 seconds of silence, she could see it in him too. The look of a man who has been outmaneuvered and knows it, and is already past the point of processing the wound and into the mechanics of what comes next. Elias, she said, Bessa has him. He's still asleep. He needs to go to the bunker, now, tonight, not in the morning. I know, Damien said, and I need to go with him. She looked at her patient, at the abdominal wound that she'd sutured and Renner had let stay sutured because a man who opened those sutures would be too visible. She thought about the drip line. About the fact that Renner had had 30 minutes alone with both patients before she'd come back in, and in those 30 minutes he had made one change and only one, which meant it was the change that mattered most. Not the wounds, not the sutures, but the drip. Slow, deniable, the kind of change that wouldn't show for hours. She thought about what would have happened if Elena Vasca hadn't walked in when she did. She thought about Elias asleep on the couch, with the blanket she'd put over him. She looked at Damien and said the thing she had been circling for 2 days without letting herself arrive at. This is not going to end with Vasca backing off. You know that. Yes, he said. He's going to come here tomorrow night, you said. Maybe sooner now. Yes. And when he does, it's not going to be a negotiation. No, Damien said. It's not. She stood in the middle of the medical suite with both patients breathing and the IV line she'd just replaced dripping clean saline and the supply cabinet slightly wrong and a trader somewhere in the city moving toward a phone to report everything that had happened tonight. And she understood with a clarity she'd been approaching for 2 days and had finally arrived at that. There was no version of the next 48 hours that didn't require her to be something other than what she'd been before Tuesday night at the bus stop. Not a hero, not a soldier, but not just a nurse waiting in a safe room while things happened to the people around her either. Something else, something that didn't have a name yet but that she could feel taking shape inside her chest, between the fear and the exhaustion and the particular stubborn competence that had gotten her through 11 years of emergency medicine and 3 brutal nights in this house. She looked at Damien. "Show me the bunker," she said. The bunker was 30 feet below the east wing, accessed through a door in the wine cellar that looked like a wall until you knew what you were looking at. Cass showed her the mechanism. A panel behind the 3rd rack. 2 switches that had to be toggled in sequence. And she memorized it the way she memorized medication protocols. Once, completely, without assuming she'd have a second chance to check. The space below was larger than she'd expected. Not a panic room, a functioning facility, the kind that had been designed by someone who understood that waiting was its own kind of operation. 2 rooms, one with 6 cots, a water supply, and a communication panel mounted to the concrete wall. Another that connected through a steel door and contained exactly what she needed. A proper medical bay, small but complete, with an actual surgical light mounted to the ceiling and supply drawers that were organized with the specific logic of someone who had stalked them under stress and wanted to be able to find things in the dark. She stood in the medical room and turned slowly and took inventory. Better than the repurposed room upstairs. Better than anything she'd expected to find 30 feet underground. "Who designed this?" she said. "Damien," Cass said from the doorway. She didn't answer. She opened the top drawer and checked the suture kits and the clotting agents and the IV supplies and the sealed medication packs. And she made a list in her head of what was here and what was missing and what she would need if the next 24 hours went the way she was increasingly certain they were going to go. Porto and another guard she didn't know brought the patients down in 2 careful transfers that took 40 minutes and cost both men significant pain, which they absorbed with the stoic grimness of soldiers who have been hurt before, and know the difference between pain that means something is wrong and pain that means something is hard. She got both of them settled, adjusted their IVs, checked the abdominal patient's pressure. Recovering, slowly, whatever. Renner had put in the line was metabolizing out, and made her notes in the margin of a legal pad she found in the supply drawer because there was nothing else to write on. Elias came down at 11. He was still half asleep, carried by Bessa, who was moving with a deliberateness that told Nora the woman was more frightened than she was showing. And he woke up fully in the first room and looked at the concrete ceiling and the cots and the communication panel and said nothing for a moment. Then he looked at Nora. How bad? I don't know yet, she said. Honest, he'd catch anything less. Bad enough for the bunker, he said. Yes. He sat down on one of the cots. He didn't ask more questions. He pulled his knees up and wrapped his arms around them and stared at the wall with the particular look of a child who has learned that asking for information he can't act on is a way of making himself feel worse rather than better. It broke something in her chest in a quiet, specific way that she didn't have the time to examine. She sat next to him. The man I was working with upstairs, she said. He wasn't who I thought he was. Elias looked at her. Are you okay? She looked back at him. 36 years old, 11 years a nurse, 3 nights in a house at war, sitting in a concrete room underground being asked by a 10-year-old if she was okay. Getting there, she said. He nodded. He put his head against her shoulder, which was not something she'd expected and which required a significant act of will not to react too visibly. She sat very still and let him, and after a while his breathing evened out and he was asleep again. She stayed until she was sure, then moved him gently to the cot and went back to the medical room. The night passed in the specific way that tense, suspended nights pass. Not quickly, not slowly, but in intervals, each one its own contained reality. She checked patients. She updated her notes. She ate something Porto brought down around 2 in the morning. She couldn't have said what it was, only that it was warm and that she ate all of it. She heard movement above, muffled through the concrete, and she tracked it by sound the way you track weather, by pressure change. Not the specifics, just the shape of it, whether it was getting worse or not. At 4:15, the communication panel crackled. Damien's voice. They moved the timeline. She was at the panel in 3 steps. How soon? First light, maybe before. A pause. Not hesitation, the specific pause of a man managing multiple information streams simultaneously. Vasca brought in additional people from the northern corridor. Renner made contact with someone in the organization. We intercepted it 20 minutes ago. He confirmed your location, the bunker location. Her stomach dropped. He knew about the bunker. He's been in this house before, as a guest, 3 years ago. The flatness in Damien's voice was something that had gone past anger into a register she didn't have a name for. He knew the architecture. So the bunker isn't, the door is reinforced, it buys time, it doesn't hold indefinitely. Another pause. Nora. She noticed he'd stopped saying her last name somewhere in the last 24 hours. She'd noticed it earlier and filed it away, and now it surfaced. What? She said. There's a secondary exit, east wall of the medical room, behind the equipment cabinet. A tunnel. 40 meters, comes out in the groundskeeping shed on the north perimeter. Torres knows it. If the door comes under significant pressure, Torres takes you and Elias out through the tunnel. The patients... He stopped. The patients can't move that fast, she said. No. Then I'm not going through the tunnel. Nora, I am not leaving 2 immobile patients in a room that may be breached, she said. Not loud, completely flat. That's not a negotiation. That's just what's true. The silence on the other end lasted 5 seconds. Then make sure the door holds, he said. What's happening up there? We're holding the perimeter, for now. Voices in the background, sharp, overlapping. I have to go. The panel went quiet. She stood in front of it for a moment. Then she turned to Torres, who was sitting near the door with his weapon across his lap, and the expression of a man who has been in rooms like this before and knows what the variables are. The tunnel, she said. Where exactly? He showed her. Behind the large equipment cabinet, which was on wheels, she noticed now, by design, a section of the concrete wall that was not concrete, or not entirely, a steel-reinforced panel set flush that swung inward with a specific handle recessed into it. She opened it far enough to see the tunnel, low, lit by a strip of emergency LEDs that were already on, running to a dark point 40 meters away. She closed it. She looked at Torres. If Elias needs to go out that way, she said, he goes. You take him. You don't wait for me to say it's time. You use your own judgment. If the door is taking pressure and the patients are stable enough to leave momentarily, you take the boy and you go. Torres looked at her. And you? I'll be where I need to be, she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, once, the same quality of nod Cass had given Damien in the working room. Disagreement absorbed into professional respect. She went back to her patients. The abdominal patient, whose name she'd learned during the night was Dell, was awake. His color was better. His pressure was holding at a number she would have called acceptable under normal circumstances, and was calling acceptable under these ones too. I need to tell you something, Dell said. Later, she said, checking his line. Now, he said. It's relevant. She looked at him. The night we were ambushed, he said. His voice was rough, the specific roughness of a man with fluid in his chest that isn't quite resolved. The location, the Harwick location. I knew about it. I was one of the 6. She put down what she was holding. You were one of Cass's 6. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. And I told my brother where I was going, Dell said. Not the specifics, not the operation, just the neighborhood, because he'd been trying to reach me for a week and I felt... He stopped. The pain in his face was not only physical. I told him I'd be in Harwick. He has a connection to Vasca's operation. I didn't know that. I know it now. She was quiet, processing. Does Damien know this? Not yet. Dell's eyes were very steady on her face. I'm telling you first because you're the one who's been keeping me alive, and I owe you the truth before I owe anyone else anything. She picked up what she'd put down. She restarted the check she'd paused. Her hands did not shake. I'm going to tell Cass when this is over, Dell said. Yes, she said. You are. Will you tell Damien before... The first explosion hit somewhere above them. Not close. Distant enough to be a pressure change rather than a concussive impact, the kind of thing you felt in your inner ear before you heard it. But the communication panel lit up immediately, and Torres was on his feet, and the shoulder patient, who'd been sleeping, woke with a sound that was very close to the sound her patients made when they came out of sedation, and the body registered pain before the mind registered where it was. The panel, Cass's voice, clipped and fast. East perimeter. They're inside the tree line. Damien. Static. Holding the front, but the east side is more static. Torres, do you copy? Torres grabbed the handset. Copy. Status on the primary? Down to 6 men on the grounds. We have wounded. A burst of something in the background that was not static. Maintain the bunker. Do not open that door for anything except Damien's voice or mine. Not Marco. If you hear Marco, do not open the door. Copy, Torres said. The panel went quiet again. She looked at Dell. He was watching the ceiling with an expression she recognized, the specific look of a soldier who is not where the fight is and is recalculating every choice that led to that situation. Lie still, she said. I'm fine. You have 3 days of post-surgical healing in an abdominal wound and whatever Renner put in your line 2 hours ago. You are not fine. Lie still. He lay still. The next 40 minutes were the longest of her life, which was not a small statement. She tracked the fight above her entirely by sound and by the intermittent bursts of communication from the panel. It came in fragments, the way all crisis information came, partial, overlapping, requiring her to construct the picture from what was missing as much as what was there. East perimeter breached. 3 men down, 2 walking. The front entrance held. Damien's voice once, very brief, giving coordinates she couldn't map without knowing the property. Cass's voice twice, progressively more terse. And then, at the 53-minute mark, a sound that was not muffled at all. Footsteps. On the wine cellar stairs, directly above the bunker door. Torres was at the door in 2 steps. His weapon was up. He looked at her and pointed at the tunnel cabinet. She shook her head, pointed at the patients. He accepted this with his jaw set and his eyes forward. A knock at the door. 3 beats. Silence. Then Damien's voice. Torres. Open it. She heard something in the voice, not the operational flatness of the panel. Something under it. Torres looked at her. She crossed to the panel. Damien, she said. Say something only you would say. A pause, then, you left your succulent in the guest room. I'll get it. She looked at Torres. He opened the door. Damien came through, and 2 things were immediately apparent. He was on his feet, and he was not going to be on his feet much longer. The wound was on his left side, below the ribs. She assessed it in the first second, the way the fabric was dark, and the way he was carrying his weight slightly wrong, compensating in the hip and shoulder. Not a through and through. An entrance wound with no visible exit, which meant something was still in there, and the specific pallor starting at his lips told her the internal bleeding was already underway. He looked at her. The east corridor is clear. Cass has the remaining Vascamen contained. He stopped. His breathing was controlled but costing him more than it showed. It's going to be over in the next 20 minutes. Sit down, she said. I need to… Sit. Down. He sat. Not on the cot. On the floor against the wall, which told her his legs had made the decision before he did. She was already moving, already pulling the supply drawer, already doing the triage calculation she'd done 1,000 times in the ER and twice already in this house, and was now doing again under a concrete ceiling 30 feet underground with 2 other patients behind her and a 10-year-old asleep in the next room. Where's the exit point? She said, kneeling beside him, pulling the fabric away. Left side, below the 10th rib. He said it clinically, like a man describing someone else's body. It happened 20 minutes ago. You waited 20 minutes to come down here. I needed to hold the east corridor. She looked at the wound. Entrance, no exit, moderate external bleeding that had been slowed by the pressure he'd been maintaining with his own hand. She could see the imprint of it, the shape of his palm in the blood. The internal picture she couldn't see. She would not know it without imaging. She did not have imaging. She had her hands and what she'd learned in 11 years and the specific focused calm that existed on the other side of fear when fear had been metabolized into something useful. Dell, she said. Here, Dell said from his cot. I need your eyes. You're going to tell me if my other patient's pressure monitor changes while I work. Can you see the readout from there? A pause. A shifting sound. Yes. Good. Call out if it goes below 90. She looked at Torres. I need the surgical light on and I need you to hold it at this angle. She positioned his hand with the light. Don't move. She worked. It was different from the hospital. Everything at the hospital existed to support the nurse, the surgeon, the team, the equipment, the backup, the second pair of hands that appeared when you needed it, the lab that answered in minutes, the imaging that was down the hall. Here she had what she had, and the list of what she didn't have was long, and she could not afford to look at it. She worked from what was present. The wound was deep, but the bullet had not hit the liver. She was nearly certain of that. The blood volume was wrong for a liver hit, and the location was right of the most dangerous structures. The rib was potentially cracked. She could feel the wrongness in it when she applied pressure, which meant breathing would hurt, and a pneumothorax was possible but not yet present. She cleaned, she packed, she applied the clotting agents and the pressure bandage, and she talked to him while she worked because keeping a patient conscious was the best thing she could do for their pressure, and because she had a specific reason to need him to stay with her. Talk to me, she said. About what? Damien said. His voice was still controlled, effortful now. Anything. What you were doing before all of this. A pause. Before tonight? Before any of it. Before the Empire. She pressed firmly. He didn't make a sound. What did you want to be? The question landed in the room and sat there. She hadn't planned it. It came out of the specific corner of her brain that looked for the thing a person would hold on to. He was quiet for a moment. She thought he wasn't going to answer. My father had a boat, he said. Small. He used to take it out on Sundays when I was very young. Before… He stopped, breathed carefully. I wanted to restore boats, old ones, the kind that needed significant structural work. She kept her hands moving. Did you ever? No. A pause. I know the theory. I've read enough. I just never… He stopped again. The effort of talking was increasing. There was always something that needed handling first. There always is, she said. She had him stabilized, not solved, not safe, but stabilized, the bleeding controlled to a rate her packing could manage, his pressure holding at a number she didn't love and could work with. She needed a surgeon. She needed an OR. She needed imaging. She needed 20 things she didn't have. Renner's gone, she said. Not to him, to herself, establishing the fact. There's someone else, Damien said. His voice had taken on the faint distance of blood pressure dropping slowly. Not Renner. Someone I haven't used before. Cass has the contact. Then Cass needs to make that call right now, she said. Torres, already calling, Torres said from across the room, his phone to his ear. She adjusted the pressure. Damien's hand came up and covered hers for a moment. Not grabbing, not directing, just the involuntary contact of a body seeking something solid, and then dropped away. She looked at his face. His eyes were open, present. The specific effort of a man who has decided he is going to stay conscious and is applying everything he has to that decision. The East Corridor, she said. You said it's clear. Yes. Cass has it. Yes. And Vasca. His expression changed. Vasca was not at the house tonight. She looked up. He sent his men and stayed back. He always stays back, Damien said. He's very careful. A beat. He was careful. She heard the past tense. What does that mean? It means that while his men were at my house, Cass had a team at the Aldrich compound. He looked at her. The effort of keeping his eyes focused was visible now. Vasca made one mistake. He assumed I would be defending rather than attacking simultaneously. She stared at him. You split your resources during an assault on your own house. I split my resources, he confirmed. It was a calculated risk. A calculated... She stopped herself. You could have told me that. You were in the bunker, he said. It would have worried you without changing anything. It would have worried me significantly, she said. It still worries me significantly. You are currently... She gestured minimally at the situation. This. The compound is contained, he said. Cass confirmed it 40 minutes ago. Vasca is... He stopped. Vasca is handled. She held his gaze for a long moment. She thought about Elena Vasca's face when she'd said my daughter. She thought about the 17-year-old girl at school in the city who had nothing to do with any of this, and who was going to wake up tomorrow in a world that had changed shape overnight. She thought about how close she'd come to not being in this room. The drip line. Renner's hands. The careful, professional nod he'd given her at 5:30 in the morning that she had read as one thing and been entirely wrong about. Stay with me, she said to Damien. I'm here, he said. I know. Stay that way. Torres ended his call. Surgeon's on the way. 40 minutes. Make it 30, she said. I'll relay that. She looked at Damien. His color was not good, but it was not getting worse, which was the only metric that mattered right now. His breathing was shallow, but regular. He was looking at her with the expression she'd stopped trying to name, the one that had been in his face at the hospital, in the hallway, in the working room, and was here now stripped of the professional distance that usually surrounded it. You should have gone through the tunnel, he said. Probably, she said. But you didn't. No. He was quiet for a moment. Why? She adjusted the packing. She's kept her hands completely steady. Because I'm a nurse, she said. That's what I do. He looked at her. She could see him deciding whether to push on that, whether to ask the question underneath the answer she'd given. He didn't push, but she could see that he understood. The surgeon, he said. His name is Vasquez. He's not in my operation. He's external, clean. Good. You can trust his assessment. I trust my own assessment, she said. He'll trust mine too once he sees the work. Something moved in Damien's face. Quick, controlled, gone. But it had been there. The communication panel crackled again. Cass's voice. Tired. She could hear it now, the specific compression of exhaustion in someone who has been operating at maximum capacity for hours and is beginning to meet the edge of it. Damien, the last of Vasca's men are in custody. Grounds are clear. We have 4 wounded, none critical. Porto has the perimeter. A pause. It's done. Nora looked at Damien. He looked at the panel. Copy, he said. His voice was steady. She didn't know how. Another pause from Cass. Then, how are you? The silence lasted 2 seconds. Ask Nora, Damien said. She leaned toward the panel. He needs a surgeon and a proper imaging suite and 12 hours of monitored rest at minimum. Tell me Vasquez is 25 minutes away. 28, Cass said. Close enough, she said. She went back to Damien. He was looking at the concrete ceiling with the look of a man who has completed the thing he set out to complete, and is only now allowing his body to begin presenting the bill. She checked his pressure, lower than she wanted, holding. "Elias," he said. "Sleeping," she said. "He's fine. He doesn't know what happened. He'll know what you tell him, which is that it's over." Damien closed his eyes, just for a moment. She could see the deliberateness of it, the choice to rest without letting go entirely. "You're going to be angry with me," he said. "Not a question. About the compound, about not telling you." "I'm already angry with you," she said. "That's a separate conversation." "When?" "When you have enough blood pressure to have it without passing out." She pressed his hand briefly, clinical, deliberate, exactly as much as was necessary, and no more. 28 minutes. Stay. He stayed. In the next room, Elias slept. Above them, the house stood. Outside, the first gray suggestion of dawn was beginning somewhere beyond the walls and the perimeter and the cleared grounds where men she didn't know lay wounded in the specific way wars ended. Not cleanly, not fully, but decisively enough that the night was over and the morning was coming whether anyone was ready for it or not. She knelt beside Damien Moretti in a concrete room 30 feet underground and kept her hands where they needed to be and listened to him breathe and counted the minutes until Vasquez arrived, and she did not look away. Not for a second. Not once. Vasquez arrived in 26 minutes. She heard the door at the top of the wine cellar stairs open and the footsteps come down, and she was already standing when Torres let him through. A compact man in his 50s with close-cropped silver hair and the specific kind of face that has absorbed a great deal without softening. He carried his own bag. He looked at the room in one sweep, and then he looked at her, and she looked at him, and that 2-second assessment between medical professionals contained everything necessary. "GSW, left lateral, below the 10th rib, no exit," she said. "Entrance approximately 22 millimeters. External bleeding controlled with packing and direct pressure, applied 53 minutes ago. Pressure has been holding at 88/60 for the last 18 minutes, down from 94 when I first assessed. Breath sounds equal, bilaterally, no signs of pneumothorax. Rib involvement likely. I can feel irregularity at the 10th. Internal picture unknown without imaging." Vasquez crouched beside Damien and began his own assessment without responding to any of this, which she understood was not dismissal, but the focused silence of a man doing the most important thing in the room. She stood back exactly far enough to give him working space and no further. Damien looked at Vasquez. "How bad?" "Let me look," Vasquez said. "I need an honest answer." "You need me to look first, and then I'll give you an honest answer." He pressed 2 fingers carefully along the rib line, and Damien's jaw tightened and he said nothing. Vasquez looked up at Nora. "Your packing work?" "Yes." "It's good." He said it the same way he'd said it to a colleague. Then to Damien, "I need to go in, not here. I have a facility 12 minutes from this property. Private, clean, fully equipped. You're stable enough to transport if we move now and don't do anything sudden." "Define sudden," Damien said. "Don't try to walk out of here," Vasquez said. "Don't argue about the stretcher. Don't tell me you're fine." Damien looked at Nora. She looked back. "He's describing things you were about to do," she said. Something moved in Damien's face. "Fine," he said. The transport took 9 minutes of careful, methodical work. Torres and Porto and a third man. She didn't know, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before. The stretcher navigating the bunker stairs and the wine cellar, and the house with a care that cost everyone involved significant effort, and Damien visible pain that he absorbed without comment. She walked beside him with her hand on the pressure bandage, and she did not take her eyes off his face, and his face told her what she needed to know, present, effortful, holding. Outside, the dawn had arrived. She hadn't seen outside in more than 12 hours, and the light hit her strangely, pale and cold, the kind of early morning light that makes everything look like it's still deciding whether to exist. The grounds were wrong in ways she catalogued automatically. A section of the east perimeter wall with a breach she could see from here, dark scoring on the stone that was blast damage. 3 vehicles she didn't recognize, stopped at angles that said they'd been stopped in a hurry. Men moving, some of them in the kind of careful way that meant they were hurt and managing it. Cass was standing near the main door. He looked at the stretcher, then at Nora. His face said several things in rapid sequence: relief, exhaustion, and the specific expression of a man recalibrating a prior assessment. "Facility's ready," he said to Vasquez. "I cleared it 20 minutes ago." "Good," Vasquez said. He was already at the vehicle. Cass looked at Nora. "You should come." "I was planning to," she said. She rode in the vehicle with Damien and Vasquez and Torres, her hand maintaining pressure for the 12 minutes of transit, the city moving past the windows in the thin early light. Nobody spoke except Vasquez, who asked 2 clinical questions she answered and 1 she couldn't, and he accepted the gap without friction. The facility was the kind of place she would never have found without being driven to it. A private medical building behind a commercial block. Nothing on the exterior to indicate what it was. The interior revealing itself only past the second set of doors as a fully equipped surgical suite with 2 operating rooms and a recovery space that was considerably better than her hospital's. Vasquez took Damien into the first OR at 6:14 in the morning. She was not allowed inside. She sat in the corridor outside on a metal chair, and she put her back against the wall, and she did not let herself think past the next 5 minutes. She stayed in 5-minute intervals for 3 hours and 20 minutes. At 9:41, Vasquez came out. She was on her feet before he'd fully come through the door. "Bullet lodged against the 10th rib, did not penetrate the pleural cavity," he said. Watching her face, she noticed the way experienced practitioners delivered results to someone who would understand the technical weight of each word. "Rib is cracked but intact. Internal bleeding was present. A small vessel, now repaired. Blood loss was significant but manageable. He'll need monitoring for 48 hours minimum, and he is not going to enjoy the next 10 days. He paused. "Your field work kept him viable. If that packing had shifted during transport, the outcome would have been different." She exhaled. A single breath, long and deliberate, the kind her body had been holding in reserve for 3 hours. "He's asking for you," Vasquez said, "which I'm choosing to interpret as a good neurological sign." She went in. The recovery room was small and deliberately dim and smelled like antiseptic and the specific clean air quality of a space with good filtration. Damien was in the bed with an IV in each arm and the particular flatness of someone whose body has just been significantly rearranged and is processing the insult. His color was better than it had been in the bunker. His eyes were open. She sat in the chair beside the bed. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Damien said, "You stayed." "I said I would." "In the bunker. When I told you about the tunnel." He looked at her. The post-surgical weight was in his face, but his eyes were clear. "You could have taken it. You should have taken it. By any reasonable—" "I had patience," she said. "Nora." She looked at him. "Don't do that," he said. "Quiet. Don't put it all on the job." She held his gaze. "No," she said after a moment. "It wasn't all the job." He didn't push further. She was grateful for that. The space between what had been said and what hadn't was the right size. Not too small to breathe in, not so large that it became avoidance. "Elias," he said, "Bessa has him. He knows the operation is over. He knows you're alive. He's managing it in the way he manages things. Which is to say he's not letting anyone see it. Which is to say he's 10 years old and very determined to be fine and probably needs to cry somewhere private and won't." She paused. "He needs to see you soon. Not because he'll ask for it, he won't, but because he needs to." "Today?" Damien said. "This afternoon." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. She could hear the monitors, the specific ambient language of recovery equipment, and under it his breathing, slower now than in the bunker. Easier. "Del," he said. "Stable. He needs another week of careful recovery. He also needs to talk to you." She kept her voice level. "He has information about the Harwick breach that you need to hear from him." Damien looked at her. "He told you?" "He told me first because he felt he owed me. He's prepared to tell you everything." "Is he responsible for the ambush?" "Indirectly. Through information shared with someone he trusted who turned out to share Vasquez's interests. He didn't know what he was doing." She paused. "That matters. Or it should." Damien looked at the ceiling. The silence this time was a different texture, something being weighed in it. "I'll hear him," he said. "Good. That's not forgiveness." "I know," she said. "It doesn't have to be. It just has to be a hearing." He looked at her sidelong. "You're very insistent on due process for people in my organization." I'm insistent on not destroying people before you know what you're destroying, she said. You can decide what you think afterward. He almost smiled. She saw the edge of it, the place where it would have gone if his body had been in better condition for the production of smiles. You're going to be a problem, he said. Probably, she said. You've had a week to figure that out. He closed his eyes. Not in pain, in the deliberate way of someone letting the adrenaline finish metabolizing, the specific surrender of a body that has been held on command for too long and is only now being permitted to rest. She stayed until she was certain he was sleeping. Then she went out into the corridor and found Torres sitting against the opposite wall in a mirror of her earlier posture, and she sat down beside him, and they both looked at the same middle distance for a while without speaking. How long have you worked for him? She said finally. 14 years, Torres said. And in 14 years, this is the third time he's needed a surgeon, Torres said, not counting the field stuff. He paused. The first time he was 29, the second he was 37. He was in a different situation then. Different. Everything was different. She thought about what he wasn't saying and didn't ask him to say it. He's a good man, Torres said. Then, I know how that sounds from where you're sitting. It sounds complicated, she said. Good men in bad worlds still live in the world. Torres nodded. Yeah, he said. That's about right. She closed her eyes for 10 minutes, and it was the closest thing to sleep she'd managed in 18 hours. And when she opened them, the corridor was the same, and Torres was the same, and the monitors behind the door were the same, and the world had not reorganized itself while she rested, which was both disappointing and expected. At 11:30, Cass arrived. He came with a driver she hadn't seen before, and the specific look of a man who has been awake for 36 hours and is running on the compressed fuel of unresolved business. He sat across from her in the corridor and put his hands on his knees and looked at her directly. I owe you an acknowledgement, he said. You don't owe me anything, she said. The tunnel, he said. Damien told me you refused to leave the patients. I assessed you wrong. He said it the way men like Cass said things that cost them, directly, without cushioning, getting it done. I thought you were a liability in the house, a complication. I was incorrect. She looked at him. You were right to think it, she said. I was a complication. I'm still a complication. There's a difference between a complication and a liability, he said. I know the difference. I should have made it earlier. She nodded once. What happened with Marco? Cass's expression changed. The acknowledgement was finished. Something more functional came back into his face. We have him. He was at the Birch address when we moved on him this morning. There was no resistance. He paused. He knew it was over. I think part of him was relieved. What happens to him? Cass looked at his hands. That's Damien's decision. I know it is, she said. I'm asking what you think will happen. He was quiet for a moment. Marco has a daughter, he said. 8 years old. Her mother is not in the picture. He looked up. Damien knows that. He's known Marco for 11 years. Whatever he decides, he stopped. It won't be simple. She absorbed that. And Elena Vasca's daughter. Already relocated, Cass said. Last night, before the assault. She's in a safe location, doesn't know why yet, but she's safe. Elena knows. Elena is... He paused again. Elena is in a complicated position. She turned against her husband, and now her husband is... He stopped. You can say it. Dead, Cass said. Armin Vasca died at the Aldrich compound at 4:17 this morning. Our people were there. It was not clean. It was what it was. She thought about Elena's face in the working room. The composure of a woman who had made the larger of two bad choices. The specific way she'd said, my daughter, not please protect my daughter, just the name, the fact, the thing that mattered most. She's going to need somewhere to go, Nora said. We're working on it. Her daughter needs to know her mother is alive and that she's... She stopped herself. That's not my call. No, Cass said. But I'll pass it on. He stood to leave and then stopped. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man deciding whether to say something he hasn't planned to say. Damien doesn't let people in, he said. In 14 years, and I know this man, he has let 3 people close enough to matter. His son, Bessa. He paused. And now, it appears, you. He said it without sentimentality, without implication. just the fact. I'm not sure what to do with that information, but I thought you should have it. He left before she could answer. She sat with it. Elias came to the facility at 2 in the afternoon, brought by Bessa in a car that Torres had arranged. He walked into the recovery room and he stood at the foot of his father's bed, and his face did the thing she'd described to Damien. The careful, controlled management of someone who has decided to be fine. And then Damien said his name, just his name, and the management collapsed entirely. She stepped out. She stood in the corridor and listened to the muffled sound from behind the closed door, which was a child finally crying without trying to make it quiet. And she pressed her back against the wall and looked at the ceiling, and her own eyes were not entirely dry, which she acknowledged privately and without apology. After a while the sounds changed, quieter. Then a long silence that was a different quality from the earlier ones settled, the kind of silence that exists after something necessary has happened. She knocked. She heard Damien's voice. She went in. Elias was in the chair she'd been sitting in, turned sideways with his legs over the arm the way children sat in chairs that weren't designed for them, reading from his phone. He looked up when she came in. He says he's fine, Elias said. Dry. 11-year-old skepticism delivered with the precision of someone who had learned it from the best available teacher. He is not fine, she said. He is alive and recovering, which is different. That's what I said, Elias said. He said that's the same thing. She looked at Damien. I may have overstated, Damien said. She sat on the edge of the bed, the side away from the IV lines and the wound, and she looked at the two of them, and the image they made in that room was something she didn't try to name, just observed. I need to ask you something, she said to Elias. He looked at her. When I drove you home that night, she said, the things you told me in the car, about the room without windows, about running when there was a gap. Did you tell your father all of that? Elias was quiet for a moment. Most of it. And the rest? He glanced at Damien, then back at her. There was a man, he said carefully, at the place where they kept me. He wasn't one of the ones who grabbed me. He was there later. He brought me food. He told me not to make noise. He paused. He was the one who left the door open. She and Damien looked at each other. He helped you escape, she said. Yes, but he worked for them. For Vasca. I knew that because, Elias frowned at his own memory. Because he had a tattoo. I know what the tattoo means. I've seen it before on the men who come to the house sometimes. She looked at Damien. His face was doing the rapid recalculating thing again. One of Vasca's own people let you out, he said. I think he was scared, Elias said. Not of the men, of what the men were going to do after Vasca got what he wanted. He said this with the flat perceptiveness of a child who has spent his life reading rooms. He didn't want to be there when that happened. The room held that information for a moment. You didn't tell me this, Damien said. Quietly. Not accusatory. Something more interior. You had a lot to deal with, Elias said. And I didn't know if it mattered. It matters, Damien said. Everything you know matters. Elias looked at him. I know, he said. And then, simply, I'm sorry I didn't say sooner. Damien looked at his son for a long moment. The expression on his face was the one she'd seen in the bunker, in the corridor, in the working room, the one she'd stopped trying to name. And under the post-surgical pallor and the weight of the last 24 hours, it was very clear. Don't apologize, Damien said. I should have made it easier for you to tell me. Elias looked at the phone in his hands. He nodded once, small, the nod of a child accepting something true. The afternoon moved through the facility in a slow, deliberate way. Vasquez came in at 4 and reviewed Damien's post-operative indicators and said things that were cautiously positive and delivered one instruction with a firmness that suggested it had been ignored before. No operational decisions for 72 hours. Damien received this the way he seemed to receive most instructions, with the surface of compliance and the clear subtext of a man who was going to make his own assessment when the time came. Vasquez looked at Nora when he said it. She understood she was being enlisted. I heard him, she said to Vasquez. And to Damien, so did you. I heard him, Damien said. 72 hours is not a reasonable... It's the most reasonable thing anyone has said in this building in the last week, she said. You were shot. You had surgery this morning. In 72 hours you can make operational decisions. In the next 72 hours, you can eat, sleep, see your son, and let your body do the work it needs to do. Vasquez left with the specific, satisfied expression of a professional who has found competent backup. Damien looked at her. You're going to do that a lot. Probably, she said. You can decide if you want to keep me around. She said it without thinking about it fully, and it landed in the room before she could assess what it contained. He looked at her with the particular attention he gave things that mattered. Is that a question? He said. She looked at her hands. I don't know what it is. Then I'll answer it anyway, he said. Yes, I want you to stay. He said it the way he'd said everything that mattered, directly, without dressing. Not because you're useful, though you are. Not because Elias... He stopped. Because I want you here. She looked at him. That's the first time you've said something that wasn't strategic, she said. It's strategic, he said. It's just a different kind of strategy. She almost laughed. Not the exhausted, absurdist laugh from earlier in the week. Something real, something that came from a place that hadn't been available until this exact moment. I'm not going to become part of your operation, she said. I'm not going to run things or manage things or make decisions about the kind of things that happen in your working room. That's not who I am. I know. But I can... She stopped, found it. I can be here. In the parts of it that need what I have, which is not strategy, it's just being present. He looked at her for a long moment. That's enough, he said. That's more than. She nodded once. Something settled in her chest. Not resolved, not finished, but settled, like a thing that had been in motion for a long time, finally finding the surface it was meant to rest on. 3 days later, Damien came home. The house had been repaired with a speed and thoroughness that spoke to resources and the specific motivation of men who wanted their home to look like their home again. The east perimeter breach was sealed. The grounds were clear. The rooms were the same as they had been. The books, the chess set, the photograph of the shoreline. She was in the kitchen when they brought him in. She heard the cars, and she didn't go to the door. She let Torres and Cass and Bessa do what they needed to do, let Elias run from whatever room he'd been in to the front hall, let the house reconfigure itself around his return. She put the kettle on instead. She got out 2 mugs. He came into the kitchen 20 minutes later, moving with the careful economy of a man whose body was still reminding him of the week he'd had. He looked at the mugs on the counter. Tea, she said. Don't argue about it. I wasn't going to, he said. She turned and looked at him. In daylight, in the kitchen, without the crisis around, he looked like a man who had been through something and was coming out the other side still standing, which was the most accurate description she had. Del is upstairs, she said. He wants to talk to you. I know. I'll go up in an hour. Not longer. Not longer, he agreed. She poured the water. She brought him his mug and she sat across from him at the kitchen table, and they drank tea in a kitchen in a house that had been through a war and was still standing. And outside the window, the garden was the winter gray of early morning, and there was nothing that needed to be handled in the next 60 seconds. Elias came in at some point. She didn't register exactly when, only that he was suddenly there, sitting in the third chair with a bowl of cereal he'd assembled himself, reading his deep-sea creature book propped against the fruit bowl. His presence in the room was the specific, comfortable presence of someone who has decided that this is where he belongs and has stopped wondering about it. The cookie-cutter shark, Elias said to neither of them in particular, bites perfect circles out of other animals. It doesn't kill them, just takes a piece and leaves. That's disturbing, Nora said. It's efficient, Elias said, completely serious. She looked at Damien. He was looking at his son with the expression that wasn't the professional one, and wasn't the wound-absorbing one, and wasn't any of the ones she'd cataloged over the last week. It was simpler than all of those. Just a man looking at his child. She looked back at her tea. There were things still unresolved. She knew them, and she wasn't pretending otherwise. Marco, and whatever Damien decided about him. Elena Vasca, whose future was a question nobody had fully answered yet. Del's reckoning with what his carelessness had cost. The question of the anonymous man inside Vasca's operation, who had left a door open for a boy he could have left to whatever came next. The question of what the Moretti name meant now, and what it was going to mean going forward, and whether the empire could be reshaped into something that Elias could inherit without inheriting all of it. Those were not kitchen table conversations. They were coming. She knew they were coming, and she wasn't afraid of them the way she'd been afraid of everything a week ago, which was its own kind of information. Marco's situation resolved itself 4 days after Damien came home. She wasn't in the room for it. She learned about it from Cass, who told her in the specific spare language he used for things that had been difficult. Marco was alive. He would not be part of the organization. I was going to a place that wasn't here, with his daughter, under conditions that Cass described as restricted, and Nora understood were as generous as the situation allowed. She thought about what Cass had told her. Marco has a daughter, 8 years old. And she thought about Damien knowing that and making the decision he made, and she understood something about him that she hadn't understood before. The man she'd been afraid of was the man she'd imagined. The one in this house was more complicated than that. Not less dangerous. Not less capable of things she would not choose to be close to. But more complicated. More human. She called her mother on the 5th day. She stood at the window in the guest room. Her room, she'd started thinking of it that way without deciding to. And she called on a Sunday the way she always did, and her mother's voice came on with the particular warmth of someone who has been waiting without saying so. "You haven't called in 2 weeks," her mother said. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. Things have been—" She stopped. "Things have been different." "Different how?" She looked out at the winter garden, at the groundskeeping shed on the north perimeter, its ordinary face, the exit point of a tunnel she hadn't needed to use, at the repaired wall, at the ordinary winter morning. "I'll explain," she said. "Not today. Soon. Are you all right?" She thought about the question honestly. "Yes," she said. "I think I actually am." Her mother made the sound she made when she wasn't fully satisfied but was choosing to accept. "You sound different," she said. "I am different," Nora said. "A little." Different good or different bad? She thought about the mug on the kitchen table, about Elias and the cookie-cutter shark, about the way Damien had said, "I want you here," without wrapping it in anything. "Different real," she said. Her mother was quiet for a moment, then, "Tell me everything when you're ready." "I will," she said. "I promise." She hung up and stood at the window for a while longer. The garden was beginning to do something in the far corner near the old stone wall, the first ambiguous suggestion of something green under the gray, the kind of thing you could dismiss as a trick of light, except that she'd been looking at that corner every morning for a week, and the green was definitely more than it had been. Her succulent was on the windowsill beside her. It had lost one arm during the relocation, which now seemed like a minor casualty. The remaining structure was holding. She went downstairs. Elias was in the hallway with a chess piece in his hand. A knight, she thought, the horse one. And he was carrying it with the absent-minded focus of someone who picks things up without registering why. "Do you play?" she said. He looked at the chess piece, then at her. "My father tries to teach me. I'm not very good." "Neither am I," she said. "We could be bad at it together." He considered this with the gravity he applied to most proposals. "Okay," he said, "but I should tell you that I make moves that don't make sense, and it frustrates him." "It would frustrate me too," she said. "Do it anyway." The small thing that crossed his face then was not quite a smile and was better than one. Damien was in the working room with Cass, the door partly open, voices at the low functional pitch of two people working through a problem rather than performing the working through of it. She didn't interrupt. She went to the kitchen and she made coffee and she sat at the table and she looked at the drawing on the refrigerator, the blocky, enthusiastic drawing, dog or small bear. And she thought about the bus stop in the rain 10 days ago and the card she'd thrown away and dug out and put in a drawer and carried across the city in her coat pocket. She thought about the boy sitting still in the specific way of someone who has learned that stillness is protection. She thought about what one decision at a bus stop in the rain had made her, and what she'd lost because of it, and what she'd found instead. She didn't have a clean answer to any of that. Life didn't tend to provide them, in her experience. It provided the things that happened, and the space between them in which you decided again and again who you were going to be. She had made her decision. She was going to make it again tomorrow and the day after that, not because it was simple, but because it was hers. Damien came into the kitchen sometime later. He moved better than he had. Not well, but better, the compensation in his gait less pronounced. He looked at the coffee. "Is there enough?" he said. "Yes," she said. She got up and poured him a mug without being asked. He sat across from her. He picked up the mug. Outside the window, the winter morning was the same as it had been, gray and still, and the garden corner was the same, the tentative green holding on. Cass thinks we should move the north perimeter monitors, Damien said. Different configuration. I want your opinion. She looked at him. You want my opinion on perimeter security? You identified the Elena breach before any of my people did, he said. And you noticed the Renner gap in her timeline when I missed it. He said this without the particular inflection of a man making a concession, just fact. I want your opinion on things I'm likely to miss. She considered this. That's different from being part of your operation. Yes, he said, it is. She looked at her coffee. The north perimeter monitoring configuration creates a gap between 23 and 27 minutes into a breach before secondary coverage kicks in. I noticed it the night Elena came in. She paused. Stagger the intervals and put a manual check at the 13-minute mark. Low tech, hard to anticipate. He looked at her. He was very still in the way he went still when something had landed with weight. When did you notice that? He said. The night you showed me the bunker, she said. I notice things. It's a nursing habit. She picked up her mug. You told me you wanted someone to tell you what you miss. I'm telling you. He held her gaze for a long moment. All right, he said. And that was where it began. Not with a dramatic declaration. Not with the resolution of every complication. Not with anything that could be described as simple or clean. It began with two people sitting at a kitchen table on a winter morning with coffee that was getting cold, in a house that had been through something and was still standing, deciding together what came next. Outside, in the garden corner by the stone wall, something green was growing. It was small and probably fragile, and it had no way of knowing what the weather would do next. But it was there, and for now, that was enough.